Welcome to The Keep, the Employee Experience Podcast. Your host, Greg Weiss, brings together experts from around the world sharing their insights on creating amazing employee experiences. Having the wrong attitude about their people can cost businesses a fortune. Having the right attitude will build success. Over to you, Greg.
Thanks, Angela. In this episode of The Keep, I speak with David Walker, and I wanted to interview David because he focuses on the importance of bringing a fuller person to work, allowing inspiration, creativity and intuition into any employee's role. Here's how this fits into the employee experience. Hey there, I'm Greg Weiss and welcome to the Keep podcast. And today in the studio, I have David Walker, who is a self-realization coach. So that's a really interesting term, David, self-realization coach. What's that all about?
I actually put a distinction between what a lot of people use out there, which is, life coach. Great work done by life coaches everywhere, but generally what it means is that you're leveraging off of the coach's energy, so it's a motivation model. Whereas for me, self-realization is when you've done quite a lot of that and you realize that there is an edge still. The edge is, I still feel discomforted. I still don't have what I really want. I still have grittiness in my life that I don't quite understand. That then the only place really left to do is to go inwards. So going into self-realization, understanding what inspires you from within rather than what you need motivating into action around.
Okay, that's a great way of being able to describe that. And full disclosure for the listeners here, and that is that I've worked in the past with David for about 3 years, and how David found me initially was a guy that lived a heck of a lot more in my head and far less creative than what I am today. This podcast is as a result of some of the work that I've done with David. Now, before we go into the material a little bit more deeply, an interesting background. There's an arc in your life. You were a hairstylist. Tell us about how a hairstylist gets into become a self-realization coach.
Well, like most people, I was in the industry for quite a long time, and I was beginning to feel that sense of dissatisfaction. There must be more, and it was at that point where I was either going to jump in more and really just go for it and have my own place and do my own thing.
So the hair industry got you by the short and curlies.
Oh, you're so funny, Greg.
There you go.
It did indeed. So that was what really triggered my stepping into personal transformation work and understanding myself more.
Because somebody who's in a privileged position of doing people's hair, people open up to you, don't they?
And that's really what I came to learn when I was exploring things for myself. I was able to see that, I was the unpaid psychologist, as we're often known. And, we would hear people's issues and problems, and there was the cone of silence, of course. We would never share it with anybody. And it was just interesting to me because I realized then the wealth of experience that I had got instead of focusing on what I hadn't, which I was there, like a lot of people, coming from a family that loved to have a certificate on the wall and an ology and an ism and but for me it was all very practical experience, and I saw over those 14 plus years how people worked, how they operated, what they thought about the commonality of things that us human beings go through, and why we do the things we do sometimes, which seem pretty crazy and irrational. So it was almost like I'd done my PhD by the time that I'd come to realize that,
But being a hairstylist would have created a pretty interesting environment for you to start to question about yourself, and also to what extent people have really got to that point where they've got to be looking for something more. And again, what I've found was, having read for a lifetime in a whole lot of self-development books, my time in meeting up with David was something where I was at a crossroads and saying there's got to be something a lot deeper, or something much more rich there. And through interacting with David as a self-realization coach, what I found was that there were some pathways that really opened for me. So I want to thank you for that. An interesting philosophy that you have is as follows: I create the whole of my own reality with love and wisdom always, even when it doesn't feel like it.
That's right, in brackets.
Let's talk about that, brackets and all.
Yes. Well, it's a premise I was introduced to myself back in early 2000 by a very gorgeous lady, Lorna Patton, who introduced it as a premise to me. And I loved the idea of a premise because it wasn't saying or stating that this is a fact. And so it allowed me to explore what that actually meant and how to apply it in my life. Being a premise, it's open to being developed further, and I love that because it's a continuum. It's not a closed book story. But just by putting that premise in place when I'm working with somebody, it provides a concrete container from which we can explore everything that's going on within your world. And it's because it puts you back into a place of being at cause rather than at effect. I create the whole of my own reality with love and wisdom always, and with the bracketed bit, even when it doesn't feel like it, because quite often it doesn't feel like we do. It feels like stuff happens to us. It feels like it's accidental, and we either look at it like it's good luck, bad luck, fate, fatalistic. It's rich with distinction, and it's easy to misinterpret this statement, this premise too. So it takes a while to explore. And I know that even after being in this, working with this premise for as long as I have, I still get distinctions, which is what keeps it alive for me.
It's a deceptively simple concept. I create the whole of my own reality with love and wisdom always, brackets, even when it doesn't feel like it, end brackets. There is so many layers to this. I too have found in working with you in the past, and as I continue every day moving forward, when I think about this, there are so many different layers, because I isn't just me as Greg or I as David. There are a whole lot of different levels to this, aren't there?
So what it introduces is that you are not just your physical body with all of your circumstances.
Love it.
Which is what a lot of people tend to view their life, and that's why you can understand then why we think that we're going to be happier if we have our house, if we have our relationship, if we have our car that we want, and yet 2 or 3 months into it, we realize, okay, not quite as happy as I thought. So we keep getting onto that treadmill, and luckily anyway, that a lot of people are really beginning to see through that, and they're beginning to question it more and more. But the assertion of this premise states that you're not just your physical body and your physical experiences and accumulation of stuff. It says that you are the energy that moves your body.
And so let's go down that. Some of our listeners would be familiar with the term that we're not a human being having a spiritual experience. We're a spiritual being having a human experience.
That's right, yes.
So let's take this concept a little deeper about I create the whole of my own reality.
How I explain it to my clients is that even if I got the most skilled of surgeons to cut down into the smallest quark of your body, it's not going to find the bit that we're pointing at right now. But we do know, if you've been in a privileged enough position to be when somebody's passed, a difficult situation for us humanly, but when you're in a room and you see somebody pass, you know when it's gone. So you know when it's gone. We just don't necessarily know what to call it when it's there. But I would just call it whatever feels comfortable for you, actually, because the approach that I have is not a religious one, but it does assert that, you are the energy that moves your body. You are a soul or a spirit that animates your body.
Let's just make sure that people are checking in here, because this is concepts that have been brought in by organisations called spiritual intelligence. We've had organisations where a major bank in Australia was very well known for bringing that in via its CEO, and that is understanding that the intellect isn't the be-all, end-all, that we are far more than just what you affectionately call the skin bag.
Exactly, the skin bag with the pinhead on top. That was an also borrowed statement, but yes, we're not just walking around asleep. But often it can feel like that, we're on autopilot and we're not actually stopping for a minute to pay attention to what it is that really animates us. Right. A lot of it is unconscious.
And that is the key, isn't it? It's about what really animates us. So if we're leaders, if we're supervisors, if we're an individual, we all are yearning for something that really animates us.
And animation is a feeling, right? People often will be able to identify with this. but probably haven't thought about it, is you walk into a room and you naturally will gravitate and be drawn towards where there's animation in the room.
Mm-hmm.
That's because it activates your own animation, right?
Mm-hmm.
But most of the time, as I said, it's unconscious. So there is statistic that I heard one time from Dr. Deepak Chopra, who said that in our awareness or in our consciousness, we are conscious of who we are, why we're doing what we're doing, why we're thinking what we're thinking, perhaps 7 or 8% of the time.
7 or 8%.
So I rounded up to get, to 10% just to make us feel a little bit better. But that still means that there's a whole whacking 90% of us, which is unconscious. We're not aware of running the show. We're not aware of making our choices for us, but it's still us,
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, that's what really activated me about the work that I do, because for me, it's about shifting that 90% into the 10%.
Yes.
And the more conscious you are, the more choice you have, of course.
Explain.
Well, if you assert that there's a premise that says I create the whole of my own reality, you can change that word create, by the way, to choose. I choose the whole of my own reality. But if you're going around and making your choices from a little 5% consciousness, 10% consciousness, then of course you can understand why we might feel dissatisfied and feel like we don't really get what we want from life and find our way down sort of little rat runs and feel dissatisfied, because you're just not bringing in the fullness of who you are. You're not bringing in the consciousness that you are.
And that fullness is part of that consciousness. Right. So we as human beings, Westerners, we're often described as being, well, in fact, Rene Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. You in your field, in self-realization coaching, how would you redefine what Rene Descartes said?
I would say that whenever anything has any real meaning and has us come alive, it's because our feeling is behind it. And I'm not just talking about emotional feeling, I'm talking about the feeling that comes from that spiritual aspect, that aliveness that we have. And usually intuition is the name that we give the voice of that.
So inspiration comes to mind as well.
Yeah.
So let's divide up the word inspiration.
Yeah, so inspiration in spirit, with spirit, speaking with spirit, turning up with spirit, using your animation to create the things that you would love.
So I'm feeling inspired about this conversation at this particular point. We're going to come back after the break and find out more about inspiration and going deeper.
Eagle Ways Radio, the voice of small business.
People come and go in organisations all the time, and while that's normal, high employee turnover can be expensive. Greg Weiss and Career Support 365 have structured onboarding and offboarding services. They create the foundation for long-term success, protecting the employer and brand while helping people perform at their best and fit in quickly. Start strong, finish strong. To find out more, go to careersupport365.com.
Welcome back to the Keep Podcast, and I'm here in the studio with David Walker, self-realization coach. David, let's talk about intellect versus inspiration.
We do live in a world that, has put intellect on such a huge pedestal and at the cost of creativity, and even if I think about the work that we did together, I remember shocking the pants off quite early in the piece and suggesting that you should stop reading.
Now, this is from a guy that would read and still does read a fair bit.
Yes.
In fact, I read diligently 15 minutes a day, but you told me specifically what?
So I said, put the books aside. No more books, no more magazines, no more 5 steps of this, 7 steps of that, and business books or personal development books. Because until you've shown yourself your own capability and what you have that is inside you, that's the inspiration thing. You have to go mining for that gem. It doesn't mean that those things are wrong or bad, that they don't have interest, but generally what that does is just keep continuing to build intellect alone. And so by doing something like that, in challenging you, I know it was a big challenge for you at the time.
Very big.
Because it's like breaking a habit, isn't it? And we're constantly, that's how it relates to us not really feeling alive, because we've got all of this old content. We've accumulated this old content, which only adds to the clutter. And as we were saying about having a mindfulness or meditation practice, it helps to clarify and clear that clutter. So what's the point of continuing to keep on adding to it? It's like a push me, pull me situation. So what I do find often is really useful for most people I work with is to do a period of do not read. Just put the books to one side. And I know it sounds the opposite of how the world is plugged in generally, but until you do that, you don't know the benefit of it. And I guess I'd ask you, so what did you then see after doing that as a challenge?
I love that the interviewer becomes the interviewed. Very good from a coaching perspective, David. I'll share with the audience that what I did find was when I did put the books down, it was very difficult because it is a hardwired habit of mine, and I am constantly sweeping, looking for new knowledge and accumulating things. What I did find, and I think this is the nub here, and that is that by slowing down and by really allowing that space to then open up so that there was not the clutter in my mind, new stuff coming in, space opened up for me to be able to uncover a more Greg, a more real me. And I did feel that there was something that was amazingly creative that was happening, almost inspired.
This is why people talk about the word authenticity so much nowadays, but that's what it means. I think there are a lot of people who are trying to do authenticity, which is different to being authentic.
Let's do authenticity.
Let's do authenticity,
yes.
Exactly. Whereas, authenticity is a being state for me. It's who you really are. And so therefore that is found within your core. That is found underneath all of that clutter, which is again why it's so important to do as much cleaning as possible rather than accumulating.
Yes.
We accumulate all the time. If you think about how much stuff is thrown at us every day with our phones, with our computers and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And we're feeling the cost of that too, with overwhelm and, and our heads popping off.
Well, you just have to be, say, a commuter going anywhere, and most people aren't interacting with each other in a human way. Most people are interacting with a screen rather than interacting with a human being. So you see that all over the place. And by not cluttering then allows that clutter to dissipate and to open up some space. And once that space is open, then...
Well, that's where your intuition can inform you of what's authentically yours. Often people will come to me and they will say, I don't know what really juices me or what inspires me. And I said, well, you have to do the cleaning first. It's in there already, right? So therefore you have everything that you require. You have all of your answers within you. But whilstsoever you continue to keep cluttering and keep on putting more stuff in, which is distractions and television and bits and pieces, the stuff that we all know that we do, it's one step forward, two steps back then. Sometimes it takes a really decisive decision, to say, okay, I'm going to put aside that for a while and show myself, as you did, show myself what happens when I don't clutter.
Yes.
And then I can come to my own certainty.
I'll share with the audience that some of the most alive experiences I've had were when I wasn't reading, when I was really fully present and engaged. And I remember going away to Hawaii, and the sense of presence was quite palpable. And I remember being able to conduct conversations, and just somehow or other, I remember feeling as if I was on a different plane, being able to support and care for other people who were also in the group. And the feedback I got was one thing, but the general feeling of inspiration coming as a result of more intuition coming through. It was like some new channel that was opening up. And wouldn't we want that for everybody?
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, and now you can see why I love doing what I do and being with people the way that I am. It is that word, though. It's being present. Everything happens in the here and now. It doesn't happen in the past, doesn't happen in the future. It happens in the here and now. So the more you can clear space to inhabit the here and now, the more your authenticity comes to you. And that, of course, has applications across the whole of your life. It's not just about fixing relationship or fixing business or fixing your team or fixing, the culture of the business. It's about you starting at home, meaning you starting with you first, getting the foundation in place that's really strong. And that's why I work with that premise, because it's a strong premise. As I said, it's not a fact, but it does give you a real solid understanding from which to then start exploring and understanding yourself and knowing yourself.
Let's bring that into the employee experience. An obvious question, not just thinking employees, but more inspired employees. What's the benefit?
Well, the very common thing is you've got a whole heap of people there not necessarily believing that they're there by choice in businesses, and especially in the corporate world, right, where there's often a big sense of feeling part of a big machine and not really mattering that much, but they're part of producing something like the cog in a machine. So it's quite a valid thing to say, well, how can you have alive and engaged and authentic people that are just playing these roles that are not particularly inspiring? How do I find inspiration within a job that might not be that inspirational?
So a leader, an organisation, moving forward, so if we're looking at the future of shape of work, is going to be about creating an employee experience where people are much more inspired and much more engaged at work.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, a tangible next step, for example, a simple one that employers can help their team with, or an individual can help themselves with, what would you suggest?
I would suggest that communication is a key thing for anything to evolve. So if you've got an organisation where people tend to hide away, or the leaders are not particularly opening up communication with their team, then that's going to have to be the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
I see the benefit, of course, of introducing a premise like this, because there's not a lot of people who show up in their business environment as an employee thinking that they're creating the whole of their own reality.
Right.
You've got somebody showing up the best version or the most authentic version of themselves within their role. Of course, your business then has a knock-on effect.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a great analyst will be able to go through and see what it means to the bottom line. But to me, it's more about, well, you can see it on people's faces, and you can see it in the engagement, the conversations that happen in the hallways, because people are feeling more at ease within themselves.
Well, I can actually share with you what I have seen about Atlassian, for example, with Mike Cannon-Brooks and Scott Farquhar, where I understand that there's a portion of the work week where employees are encouraged to work on a project that is inspirational to them. They have been encouraged culturally and within the system to down tools on Atlassian work and become creative about some of their other work, and now look at the shareholder value, the real price of Atlassian. It's huge.
Totally. And I would say that, that's because they've fostered an environment that allows to connect to something that means something to them and makes them feel alive, and even if it's only for a portion of the week, it's amazing how enlivening it can be. If you think about in your own life, you put some time aside for something that juices you, you then have much more energy for the things which we have to get done.
Absolutely.
As part of being a human being, we still do our bills and we still do our banal things of day to day, but you can bring a different you to those tasks.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, what I understand also with Atlassian is that there have been some incredible projects that have been developed as a result of that inspiration that they've now brought into the mainstream, which is incredible. David, I want to talk about Ikigai, and I want to talk about what the world needs. There's a paradigm which is do what you love, do what you're strong in, and the world will pay you for those things. But there's another part of it which is to do with what the world needs. So based on that and based on your own inspiration, let's talk a little bit about that before we come to a close.
Well, firstly and foremostly, I did see Dionne Warwick last week, so I've got the song going through my mind. Love, Sweet Love, of course.
What the world needs
What
now.
the world needs now is love, sweet love. Quite simply put, if people are given the opportunity to connect into what truly connects them with their own heart, with their own feeling, what inspires them from within, that is love. That's you as a loving being turning up in an environment, whether it's home or work, actually, and making a shift, making a change. It's not everyone has to go out and solve the world's problems, because I don't believe that that is for everyone. Yeah. But the more enlivened and the more loving that somebody can be, then of course that sends, as they say, the butterfly effect out, and it affects whoever you're working with, your family members. It leads by example, and that's really, the bit about this approach that I love the most, because it fosters self-directedness, as you've heard me saying. When you clarify, you get to connect to what really motivates you and what really inspires you from within, and it's authenticity.
It's very true. I'm reflecting back on that phrase by Thoreau, which is most men, let's rephrase that now, most people lead lives of quiet desperation.
Oh, yes.
And if you look around at so many people in the city or wherever it is, most people just have that quiet desperation on their face. To employers wanting to create a brilliant employee experience, it's about how can we get more inspiration and more heartfelt enjoyment in work. And that's our responsibility nowadays as employers. I want to thank David Walker, self-realisation coach, for coming into the studio with me today and sharing this very deep and very meaningful work. I'd encourage you to find out more about David in our show notes. Thank you, David.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you for listening to another podcast produced by Eagle Waves Radio. For more amazing podcasts, go to our website, eaglewavesradio.com.au. You can like us on Facebook and, of course, follow us on Twitter. Ever thought of having your own podcast? We can help.